The United States, U.S., has formally seized a second aircraft belonging to Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, escalating tensions between the two nations and highlighting the ongoing geopolitical struggle over Venezuela's political and economic future. This move is part of a broader U.S. strategy to pressure Maduro's regime, which Washington has long accused of corruption, human rights abuses, and undermining democracy. The seizure of the aircraft also underscores the complex web of international sanctions, legal battles, and power dynamics at play in the Western Hemisphere. Remember to subscribe to this YouTube channel to keep updated. You can also like this video and send us your views in message section below. Background: the U.S.-Venezuela conflict. The relationship between the U.S. and Venezuela has been fraught for decades, but it reached a boiling point under the leadership of Hugo Chavez and his successor, Nicolas Maduro. The U.S. has accused Maduro's government of authoritarianism, electoral fraud, and economic mismanagement, which has led to a severe humanitarian crisis in Venezuela. In response, the U.S. has imposed a series of sanctions on Venezuelan officials, state-owned companies, and assets, aiming to isolate the regime and force political change. The seizure of Maduro's aircraft is part of this broader sanctions regime. The U.S. Department of Justice, DOJ, has been actively targeting assets linked to the Venezuelan government, alleging that they were acquired through corrupt practices and illicit financial activities. The first plane, a Boeing 747, was seized in 2022 after it was deemed to be in violation of U.S. export controls. The second aircraft, a luxury jet, was confiscated under similar allegations of corruption and sanctions violations. The legal and geopolitical implications. The seizure of Maduro's planes is not just a symbolic gesture. It has significant legal and geopolitical implications. The U.S. government has justified its actions by citing violations of U.S. sanctions and export control laws. By targeting high-profile assets like presidential aircraft, the U.S. is sending a clear message to Maduro and his allies that no asset is beyond reach. However, the move has also sparked controversy and debate. Critics argue that the U.S. is overstepping its jurisdiction by seizing assets owned by a foreign government. Venezuela has condemned the seizures as illegal and a violation of its sovereignty. The Maduro regime has accused the U.S. of engaging in economic terrorism and using sanctions as a tool to destabilize the country. The legal battles surrounding these seizures are likely to be protracted and complex. The U.S. government will need to provide evidence to support its claims of corruption and sanctions violations, while Venezuela is expected to challenge the seizures in international courts. The outcome of these legal disputes could set important precedents for how international sanctions are enforced and how sovereign immunity is interpreted. The broader geopolitical context. The seizure of Maduro's aircraft is part of a larger geopolitical struggle over Venezuela's future. The U.S. has been a vocal supporter of Juan Guaidó, the opposition leader who declared himself interim president in 2019. While Guaidó's influence has waned in recent years, the U.S. continues to back efforts to oust Maduro and restore democracy in Venezuela. At the same time, Venezuela has sought to strengthen its ties with other global powers, particularly Russia and China. Both countries have provided economic and political support to Maduro's regime, viewing Venezuela as a strategic ally in the Western Hemisphere. The seizure of Maduro's planes is likely to further strain relations between the U.S. and these countries, as they see it as an example of U.S. unilateralism and interference in the internal affairs of sovereign states. The humanitarian crisis in Venezuela. While the seizure of Maduro's aircraft has captured headlines, it is important to remember the broader context of the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela. Years of economic mismanagement, corruption, and U.S. sanctions have led to widespread poverty, food shortages, and a collapse of public services. Millions of Venezuelans have fled the country, creating a regional migration crisis. The U.S. has framed its sanctions and asset seizures as part of a broader effort to pressure Maduro's regime and address the humanitarian crisis. However, critics argue that the sanctions have exacerbated the suffering of ordinary Venezuelans and failed to achieve their stated objectives. The seizure of luxury aircraft owned by the Venezuelan government may further alienate the Venezuelan people, who see it as a symbolic gesture that does little to address their immediate needs. Conclusion: the U.S. seizure of a second aircraft belonging to Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro is a significant escalation in the ongoing geopolitical standoff between the two nations. It reflects the broader U.S. strategy of using sanctions and legal measures to pressure Maduro's regime and support democratic change in Venezuela. However, the move also raises important questions about jurisdiction, sovereignty, and the effectiveness of sanctions as a tool of foreign policy. As the legal battles unfold and the geopolitical tensions continue, the focus must remain on the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela and the need for a peaceful, democratic resolution to the country's political and economic challenges. The seizure of Maduro's planes may be a dramatic gesture, but it is only one piece of a much larger and more complex puzzle. The international community must work together to address the root causes of the crisis and support the Venezuelan people in their quest for a better future.